There was a time when people came to New York to start their dreams. Today, people leave New York to find a place to sleep overnight. Amidst the sparkling lights of Times Square, once the vibrant heart of America, shadows of shivering people are gradually appearing, setting up tents on the sidewalks, living among trash, cold, and invisibility. A city with a budget of tens of billions of dollars, but unable to protect those who once paid taxes, served, and built it. There are even places where not even the police dare to set foot, where the law seems to not exist, and where survival sometimes just means lying still without being chased away. And if you think this only happens to someone else, remember, just one incident, one job loss, one illness, anyone can fall into that darkness. In today's video, we will take you inside a New York that the media dares not shine a light on, a place where shameful truths are being hidden, and where, if things don't change, it could be you or your loved ones who will be next. Did you know that in the Bronx, there is an area just about a 20-minute drive from Times Square, a place that officials unofficially call the Zone, an uncontrolled zone, quoted a former police officer. I received a call reporting someone fainting in the tent, but no one on the team dared to go in alone. Many challenges await. Even the bravest sometimes have to hesitate. In that area, the law does not exist. No security cameras, no streetlights, no phone signal, and no one wants to go in, not even those trained to fear nothing. The paradox is that the people living in these forbidden zones do not commit crimes. They are former workers, elderly people receiving pensions, single mothers, or veterans who have paid taxes and fought for the country. But because they have no housing, because they can't afford rent, they are forced to set up tents in a place where even the police dare not step foot. They didn't choose that place. That place chose them. The image of the Bronx today is no different from a war zone. Though there is no fighting, it is filled with fear. Fear of being robbed in the middle of the night. Afraid of the police doing a surprise sweep. Afraid of the cold. Here, each tent is a makeshift bunker. Each day of survival is a battle. Against hunger, against the cold, against oblivion. If you ever called 911 and they didn't come, how would you feel? And if you had to live for an entire year in a place they refused to enter, what do you think that life would be like? Share your thoughts. Who knows? Someone living in that situation might feel heard. What I just mentioned is not far away but right in New York, the center of economy, culture, and a symbol of freedom. But right in the heart of that city, there exist forbidden zones that the authorities cannot control, not because of a lack of people, but because they are afraid. In a leaked internal NYPD report, there is a statistic that leaves even the most veteran officers speechless. Nearly 70% of brawls, thefts, and violence occurring in encampments go unreported. Not because nothing happened, but because the people living there have lost faith in being protected. The police call those places black zones, areas where the law seems to be absent and silence has become the survival norm. We often think, where there are laws, there is order. But here, even the law cannot step in. If you lose something, just ignore it. If you hear shouting or cries for help, look the other way. Not because of indifference, but because those who hear it are also struggling to survive. How can a wealthy city like New York, with a budget of 117 billion US dollars, have dark areas that the government pretends not to see? But that is still not a complete picture of homelessness in New York. Now the homelessness crisis has spread to the subway stations, a symbol of this city. In New York, the subway is not just a means of transportation. For thousands of homeless people, it is a shelter, a place to sleep overnight, the only place they have left. What few would expect. Many train stations have now been occupied as a form of temporary housing. In the hidden corners, behind the emergency exits, under the stairs, or between two rows of technical walls, you can see an underground society forming. Small coal stoves placed against the wall, beds made from wooden pallets. The clothesline is stretched along the concrete corridor. An elderly woman shared, People think I take the train home. But actually, I live on the train. But actually, I live on a train. And there are also hundreds of other people like her. They didn't choose to live there to escape society, but because there was no longer any space for them on the surface, where a train ticket is cheaper than a night in a shelter. A place where the noise is more bearable than the biting cold in the park. A place where the flickering fluorescent lights are still better than the complete darkness outside. In the heart of the busiest city in the world, right beneath the feet of millions of people passing by every day, lies another underground layer. Another New York. A place without a map and no address for anyone to find. Have you ever taken the last train at night? Have you ever wondered, is the person next to you really just moving? Share your feelings, because sometimes a sympathetic glance is enough to remind someone that they are still being seen. New York City at this moment has a clearer contrast than during the day. On the surface, there are areas where the police dare not step. Underground are train stations that have become makeshift homes. But what makes many people feel most choked up is not what is happening, but rather what should have happened, but never did. Safe shelters, hot meals, the relief programs, all of them exist on paper, but in reality, they have disappeared. New York City once announced, each year it spends over $4 billion on programs to support the homeless, a figure that astonished many people. But even more astonishing when they look around and see that almost nothing has changed. A 68-year-old man who used to work in the postal service said when asked about the budget, "I don't need to know how much the city spends. I only know that I still have to sleep outside." The fact is that tents are still set up all over the park. A long line of people is waiting for a meal from a charity. The shelters are either overcrowded or too terrible to stay in. So, where did that $4 billion actually go? You might be thinking of corruption or embezzlement. But the truth is more complicated. Part of it goes into complex administrative costs. A part goes to paying for expensive temporary accommodations. And part of it dissipates because the system lacks connectivity, supervision, and is too slow. This makes us raise a big question mark about this system. If the city you live in spends $4 billion each year to take care of the vulnerable, what changes would you like to see? Have you ever seen a system that spends a lot but yields very little in results? Please share your thoughts, because change begins with the right questions. In the US, only New York has the right to shelter law, a symbolic commitment that anyone in need of shelter will be provided with it. It sounds like a beautiful promise. But for many people sleeping under bridges or park benches, that promise has become as cold as the winter wind in mid-January. They came with hope, but stayed with disappointment, waiting all week to get registered, then being transferred from one station to another. Finally, sleeping sitting up in the station, because it's not your turn yet. It's not the law that's wrong. Not because there aren't people willing to help, but because the number of people needing shelters has surpassed capacity for a long time. Even places that were once emergency shelters are now overloaded. Some nights, over 1,200 people line up to register for shelter, but there are only 300 spots available. And so, the homeless have no choice but to spill onto the sidewalks, parks, and train stations, further thickening the illegal encampments. Thousands of people lose the opportunity to recover because they do not have access to stable shelter. Meanwhile, the surrounding residents are worried due to the unsanitary conditions and poor security. A vicious cycle just keeps going on. The homeless people gradually gave up the idea of waiting for shelter. They destroyed the shelter. They no longer call the hotline. They chose to remain silent and endure because they no longer trust anyone to help them. If you believe in a promise and then have to sleep outside for 3 months in winter, would you dare to believe again? In your opinion, what should change? The laws, the system, or the way we view the homeless? Among the homeless in New York, besides the poor laborers and the elderly, There is another group, less frequently mentioned, but that makes us ponder. Those are the children. It is estimated that every morning, more than 20,000 students board buses to school. The only difference is that they don't step out from their homes, but from crowded shelters, freezing subway stations, or even park benches. Those children still go to class, but in their backpacks, there aren't always enough notebooks. Instead, there are tissues, canned goods, and occasionally a letter requesting an extension for shelter. No statistic can adequately describe the feeling of being forgotten when you are only 8 years old. No policy is sufficient to heal the childhood dreams that have been confined within makeshift walls. At an age when they should have a warm home, a place to return to, a foundation for their future, they have none of these. This reality makes us question, is New York losing an entire generation just because those children are not speaking up? And if children are the future of this city, where will that future go when today they don't even have a roof to sleep under? We have just witnessed an overloaded support system, and the beautiful promises no longer hold the weight of reality. But perhaps what makes many people choke up the most is not found in the budget report or the shelter law, but it lies in something so obvious that it cannot be ignored. Two worlds coexisting on the same sidewalk. One side is the American dream in the dazzling lights. On the other side, it is also a dream, but a shattered dream, huddled in cold tents. A former driver, now living in a tent in the Midtown area, shared, "I used to drive guests to that hotel. Now I sit across the street, watching others get out of the car I used to drive. New York has never hidden its glamour, but it also cannot hide the heartbreaking things that are right next to it. Just stand at a corner of Manhattan, and you will see something no one would believe is real. A luxury hotel, where a night costs $2,000 or more, and just across the street, under a tree, a homeless person is dozing on a thin piece of cardboard. Just one lane, but the difference between the two sides is a lifetime. One side is wine, tablecloths, goose-down mattresses. One side is the smell of urine, the sound of an ambulance, and an indescribable chill. What causes the most pain for many people is not the contrast between rich and poor, but rather the invisibility. If you observe closely, you will see people getting off from the hotel, not even glancing across the street, not because they are not kind, but because they have become too accustomed to that image. And when suffering becomes the background, we stop feeling it. New York is perhaps like a shattered mirror. One side reflects the brilliant light of achieved dreams. The other side is the fragment of dreams that have been shattered. The poor and rich areas in New York are now at risk of becoming hotspots of underlying conflict due to the negative emotions caused by the contrast. Many homeless people even feel ashamed, seen as out of place amidst the luxurious surroundings. Meanwhile, tourists or new residents feel uninspired and uneasy, leading to economic repercussions. Society is gradually forming a mentality of turning a blind eye as a survival reflex, causing compassion to fade away. Have you ever been in a place where just turning around reveals a completely different world? What do you think makes a city have two contrasting lives exist just a few steps apart? Share your thoughts. Because when we dare to look at what no one wants to see, we truly begin to change. An elderly man sleeping on a bench in Central Park. Next to him is a skyscraper completely dark. Not a single window is lit. Scattered few people living there. And that's not the only building. In New York City, there are countless vacant apartments. Many people even joke that the number of vacant apartments increases every year, with the rise being comparable to the number of homeless people. According to data from the NYC Housing and Vacancy Survey, there are over 90,000 apartments that have been long-term vacant, not for rent, not for sale, and unoccupied. They are silent blocks of glass and steel, towering high, but indifferent to the thousands of people sleeping on the sidewalks below. On one side are the people without homes to live in. On one side are the houses with no one to live in them. The emptiness, on both sides, is a tragedy of modern urban life. You might think, So why not put homeless people in those apartments, right? But New York City gives you a harsh answer. Those apartments were not built to be lived in. So what are they built for? It's simple, to keep money. But who is the money being kept for? Many vacant apartments belong to foreign investors, large corporations, or the ultra-wealthy, like a safe asset storage. There, no one needs to live. Only the value must not decrease. New York at this moment is like a city with hundreds of refrigerators full of food. But the hungry person still lies just outside the door, pressing their hand against the cold glass. Because that refrigerator is not meant for eating, but for display. The average home price in New York City continues to rise, as a large amount of wealth is trapped in the speculative market. The middle class, who once lived with the belief that hard work would lead to stability and home ownership, have now had their dreams shattered. The homeless are increasingly pushed away from the central areas, losing access to healthcare, jobs, and support. The belief in social justice seems to have collapsed as people see abundant resources, but they are not shared. And the final result? A city of houses without people, and people without houses. Do you think an empty apartment should be taxed more if it is not being used? In your opinion, what makes us accept thousands of people sleeping outdoors, while houses remain empty? I really want to hear your opinion. Please leave a comment below. There is an increasingly clear paradox emerging in New York. Those who once guarded the national borders now have to sit in front of the financial center of that nation, begging for pennies. A recent statistical report shows that veterans make up 11% of the homeless population in the US, many of whom survived the war, but faltered in civilian life. Many of them do not know how to seek support or no longer have the trust to do so. Their stories are not mentioned because they seem to have long lost their voice in the system. A 74-year-old veteran who once fought in Iraq is now begging in front of the Goldman Sachs building. He is not a criminal, not lazy. He used to be a transport soldier, driving military trucks in hot zones. After retiring from the military, he did various jobs: security guard, warehouse assistant, loader, until age caught up with his health, and the pension was not enough to survive in a city like New York. Now, he sits down, right in front of the place that once represented the prosperity of the country. He shared, "I don't need anyone to thank me for serving the country. I just need a place to sit without being chased away." The soldier's jacket was old, the sleeves frayed, but he still kept it, as a reminder that he once belonged somewhere, once a part of America. New York is like a grand stage. Wall Street is the brightest light, and thousands of veterans who were once ready to defend the country are now mere shadows forgotten at the edge of that light. And when a nation cannot keep its promises to those who once served it, what else can it hold on to? But that is just one group of homeless people in New York right now. There is another group, quieter, more hidden, and equally heartbreaking. These are the people who once had jobs, once lived stable lives, once were normal, until a small incident pushed them out of the cycle, and the door of life closed behind them without warning. There is a quietly pervasive prejudice in society that homeless people are lazy, indifferent, and irresponsible. But the actual numbers shock many. Nearly 40% of the homeless in New York once had stable jobs. They are security guards, warehouse staff, drivers, electricians, receptionists, nurses. They once had colleagues, employee IDs, pensions, and installment plans. And then, just one stumble, illness, being laid off, or simply the rent doubling, they find themselves homeless, something they had never wished to happen in their lives. Many people become homeless after a small incident in just 90 days, due to the lack of an emergency fund or insurance. Those who were once stable often become more disoriented because they lack street survival skills. Along with that, the mentality of self-blame, shame, and withdrawing from society prevents them from actively seeking help. They are not the lost souls that people often label them as. They are people like you, only different in that there is no place for them to return to. But they make us wonder, when will it be our turn? But there is something even more heartbreaking than losing a home. That is being looked at with suspicion by those who were once like me. Have you ever experienced a life-changing event? If that happens when you have no one by your side, what will you do? Share it, because your story could be the starting point for someone to find themselves again. We have walked through the shattered areas, listened to the voices of the forgotten, and seen the blatant injustices on every street corner. But if you think that's just someone else's problem, then be ready to face something even more terrifying. The numbers are saying that you might be next. For the first time in nearly a century, America is approaching a milestone we once swore we would never return to. In 1932, at the peak of the Great Depression, more than 95,000 people were homeless in New York City. In 2025, that number had surpassed nearly 770,000, and there are no signs that it will stop. We once thought that images of tents in the streets, elderly people sleeping in cars, and children studying on the sidewalks were only found in history books. But now, history is not just repeating itself. It is repeating itself more quietly, more coldly, and less frequently mentioned. Because there are no longer long lines of people queuing for bread like in 1932. Now, they are lining up in front of the shelter center, with headphones on their earbuds and phones in hand. Don't let the image of modern technology and urban life deceive you. We are living in a new version of an old crisis. The highest level of homelessness in nearly 100 years is putting immense pressure on the entire healthcare, education, and urban transportation systems. Generations that once believed in the American dream are beginning to lose faith in recovery. But what is even more noteworthy is that not many people are surprised anymore, because it seems we have become accustomed to seeing people sleeping on the sidewalk as part of the urban landscape. Some people say, this is not a great recession because the economy is still growing. But the truth is, growth no longer comes with stability. We create more jobs, but we don't create more roofs. We print more money, but we don't print more trust. And perhaps the scariest thing is, instability has become a normal part of life. If America were a train, then the homelessness crisis would be like the screeching of metal grinding against the tracks, persistent, jarring, and ignored. Until the wheels come off the tracks, it will be too late to turn back. Why do you think America allows history to repeat itself, even with more technology, wealth, academics than kangaroo than ever before? If prosperity only comes to a few people, can it still be called prosperity? A retired elementary school teacher in Queens shared, "Every year, rent goes up, but my salary remains the same, like a broken needle on an old clock. I no longer run slower than inflation. I don't know how to manage anymore." If you want to know why Americans are falling into homelessness faster than ever, don't look at natural disasters or pandemics, but look at the charts. A simple yet haunting chart. The housing cost line skyrockets like a rocket. The average income line, horizontal, unchanging. Like a race where one side rides a rocket and the other walks. Every year, Americans work more, but bring home less. It's not because they are lazy, but because the system no longer keeps up with them. It leaves them behind. People with full-time jobs still can't afford to rent, and working homeless are becoming more and more common. Retirees are forced to go back to work just to buy medicine and pay the electricity bill. Middle-class households are starting to cut back on meals, sell cars, and cancel insurance because they can no longer hold on. The levels of depression, anxiety, and feelings of helplessness have surged among those aged 45 and older, a group that once believed they were settled. There was a generation that believed, just work hard, you will have a house, a car, and a fulfilling life. Now, they are the ones having to count every penny to pay for gas, medicine, and a hot meal. Not because they are overspending, but because everything is increasing, except for their salaries. And when the American dream no longer moves forward, it starts to stand still. And then, it started to slide backward. Have you ever had to calculate every dollar in your wallet down to the last detail? Do you feel like you're doing everything right, yet still falling behind? New York may be the place where the homelessness crisis is most apparent, but it is no longer an isolated case. From Chicago, San Francisco, to Los Angeles, Houston, Denver, and even small towns in Kentucky, Arkansas, or New Hampshire. Tents, cars turned into homes, and parks becoming shelters are gradually becoming familiar sights. When images that once surprised us begin to become normal, it is no longer just the story of a city, but a sign of a country that seems to be gradually losing its direction. The homelessness crisis is not a fire that ignited in New York and then spread. It is the smoldering cracks everywhere, and New York is just the place to feel the first impact. And while the media still calls it an urban issue, the reality is, in Montana, small towns have seen the number of people living in RVs double. In Florida, a single storm is enough to prevent hundreds of people from ever returning to their old homes. In Texas, families with incomes under $40,000 have to choose between rent and medicine. And if even the American dream no longer has a place in America itself, so where will be the final refuge for those who once believed in it? 15 truths, but just the tip of the iceberg. We do not tell this story to spread pessimism. We tell this story so that those living in the shadows know they are not invisible, and for those who are still fortunate, not to become indifferent. If the American dream was once a place where everyone had a chance, then now, what we need most, not a dream, but an awakening. Which state do you live in? What changes have you seen in your community over the past 1 to 2 years? Are we repeating mistakes? Not due to a lack of money, but a lack of timely attention. Please share your experiences or observations, because when the whole country looks at each other, perhaps we will realize we are not alone. And if you want to continue accompanying us, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the real stories happening right in this country, every day. This video does not aim to criticize any government, organization, or individual. All information is compiled from public sources, real data, and genuine experiences. We share with the hope of sparking interest, understanding, and a sense of community, because we believe that one person's story can be a wake-up call for society as a whole. Thank you for taking the time to watch. See you in the next videos.